Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Right here at the very beginning, I have to give a huge PSA, a public service announcement. I, once again, screwed up. In my haste of booking all these episodes, I had it in my head that I knew what I wanted to do was to structure this episode and the following two in the way that the London version of Sunday in the Park with George is done. So you have The Day Off, then Everybody Loves Louie, and then the Soldier's Song. That is still the case, but what happened in the recording of this episode is that I got turned around, mixed up, and I forgot to finish talking about The Day Off. The last two sections, basically, with the boatman and kind of the wrap up of the whole song, I thought was part of the Soldier's Song, but it's really not. Anyways, this is all to say that you're not actually going to hear me and Will White talk about the entirety of The Day Off in this episode. And for that, I do apologize. But when we get to the Soldier's Song, we'll very briefly touch upon those stanzas and then have a more fuller discussion about the soldier and his place within the show, and why that production did things in a very different way. So that's just for everyone to know here at the very beginning. Anyways, that is my announcement here at the beginning of this week's episode, but let's get into my conversation with Will White about The Day Off.
If the head were smaller, if the tail were longer, if he faced the water, if the paws were hidden, if the neck
William
was
White, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for having me back. It's a pleasure as always.
You've been here, of course, multiple times now. I'm actually mostly interested in your relationship with Sunday in the Park with George. Like, as a musical, I guess, first, how do you take it in? And then as a Sondheim work, how do you take it in?
Well, it's a work that I have come to love over many years. Now I would put it probably at the top of my personal Sondheim canon, but it wasn't always that way. I first heard the recording of the original Broadway cast. I don't know. I was early in my Sondheim days, maybe even before I had listened to other Sondheim works or really gotten into his stuff. A friend of mine burned me a CD and I listened to it and I wasn't into it at the beginning. This is like many years ago, 15 years ago or so. There was just something about like the sound. I didn't like the orchestration. I'm still wishy-washy on the orchestration, I should say.
Let's pull back some of those layers here as you're talking, because I'm trying so hard not to become a broken record, but just to let everyone know, this is the first recording of this new season I'm doing, so I've probably either said this or already a bunch of times. I don't know about you, but if for me, when I got the original Broadway cast on CD, this is actually a known issue. It's mastered really quietly, and it bugs me because even when I've transferred it to now, like my iPhone, I have to crank the sound up every time I listen to this because it's been mastered at such a quiet level, which kind of annoys me.
That's interesting. I don't know. I think that like I listen to it streaming now, and I think that they must have remastered it because I don't notice that problem.
But secondly, this is Sondheim's kind of famous breakaway from Jonathan Tunick going to Michael Strobin. So yeah, a very different orchestrator than Jonathan Tunick.
And he was a very young man, Starobin, when he orchestrated this. And, when you say breakaway, I think that a little context is needed there, because the one time I met Stephen Sondheim, or was in the same room with him, I didn't really I wasn't introduced. I was at a Q&A.
You just pushed the person out of the way and
Yeah, well, there was definitely some of that. But so I really pushed to get my question in there. And I did get to ask a question. And I asked him, I said, why did you change orchestrators from Jonathan Tunick, who's, generally regarded as the greatest orchestrator in Broadway history and one of the greats probably of all time to ever write for the orchestra? Why did you change streams to Michael Starobin? I didn't quite put it like that, but I just asked, why did you change orchestrators? And apparently the reason is that in the little theater off Broadway where they produced
Playwrights Horizons,
Sunday, Playwrights Horizons, Starobin was the house orchestrator. It was like part of the deal that you had to use this guy. But as Sondheim said, it worked out fine because Tunick was otherwise engaged on a different project.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up too, because there seems to be some non-consensus about this, because I've heard that and I've seen it written down in other articles about it was like Strobin was like kind of had to be. It was like, not forced is the wrong word, but it's like, it's just the one at Playwrights Horizons. But secondly, there's multiple people that say like, well, Jonathan Tunick was busy anyway, so like he wouldn't have been able to come even if they had.
Yeah. So
anyways, you're listening to this album.
Well, I don't know. But I mean, just to say a little bit more about that, like this is a chamber orchestration. And that took me a while to get my brain around when, Tunick had brought so much kind of symphonic richness to the Sondheim canon. This orchestration generally, it sounds more like a chamber orchestra. Even when Tunick is writing for a chamber orchestra, he makes it sound more lush.
Sure.
Whereas Starobin, I don't know. And then, of course, they're using these keyboards.
Synthesizers,
and, the synthesizers. And I don't really love the way they're programmed. I mean, we'll probably get into that in the song that we're talking about today, because there are some particular instances that I'm not wild about. So, yeah, at first, it didn't sit with me. I didn't get into it. But then, I would come back to it every couple of years because, I loved the rest of Sondheim so much. And I just thought, well, I should give it another chance. And bit by bit, I put it together. And I think that my way in was really Everybody Loves Louie, because that's such a pastiche, fun, bubbly kind of a song. And then the newer recording with Jake Gyllenhaal came out. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll give that a shot, see how I like that. And I liked it better. And then over the first winter of our discontent, the pandemic winter of 2020, 2021, I was doing absolutely nothing. I was locked in my house. I mean, this was like when you really didn't go out and do stuff. I was just doing puzzles all the time, jigsaw puzzles. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm really going to do this. I'm going to get into Sunday in the Park. And so I started watching the PBS, the original Pro Shot, I guess you would call it. And that changed everything. And what I came to find out was that the tempos of the original Broadway cast recording, they sped them up so much from what they actually did on stage. And I know that was often the case, but that was never really a problem for me with earlier musicals by Sondheim. But for Sunday, it kind of ruined it for me. And hearing the songs with a little bit of extra breathing room in performance, that changed everything. And then I really fell in love with it.
It almost sounds like a dumb thing to say, but I am going to state it out, is that I find that there are certain musicals that you just need to see to fully understand why the score works the way that it does. Because it is a visual presentation. It is meant to be seen in front of a crowd, in front of an audience. So, and I agree. I think once you sit down and watch Sunday in the Park with George, it's a very different experience than just listening to the album by itself. One, because I think you actually start to understand what is actually happening. And this is about a painting. You're supposed to be looking at this painting come alive specifically, which just does not lend itself necessarily to only listening to a recording of it.
Now, of course, once you've seen it, then the score becomes a wonderful shorthand for experiencing it. I mean, I'm the same way with listening to film soundtracks, to film scores, It's a condensed 45-minute re-experience of watching the movie itself, just in terms of like the emotional content that you get.
For sure.
So now I love it. To put a pin on that story. I mean, now I just think it's like, I can't imagine anything better.
But I think that you might be able to explain, being a conductor yourself, is like, what is Sondheim doing musically in this? Because I think it's very fascinating. One of the things I'm sure I've already talked about as well in like the intro episode is that he went through a few different options, I guess, before he kind of came to what the sound and what he wanted to do with the score, because he noticed that the amount of colors that were on the palette were the same amount of notes that are on a keyboard. So he's like, well, maybe I can work around with that, where each color is representative of a note, and he kind of disbanded that pretty quickly because he's like, I couldn't get this out of a discordant sound, and that's just not going to work. But the recurring theme that happens, especially as George is like dabbing paint on the canvas, is a recurring motif that happens through this as well, and actually finally gets resolved by the end of the show. There's little notes that he's dabbing and stuff, but I don't know if you wanted to go into more detail about like literally musically what he is doing.
Yeah, I mean, so the famous thing is that like he realized that on George Seurat's palette, the way that he had scientifically mapped out the colors of the spectrum was into 12 subdivisions, and there's 12 subdivisions in a chromatic scale of an octave. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, he was thinking about red and red orange are right next to each other, and so he would make red C and red orange a D flat. But then, like you say, it would be too dissonant because then all you'd be getting is half steps.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't, make for very pleasant songs or melodies. So he ditched that. It's very similar to, I think about, the concept of Little Night Music was that each of the characters was supposed to have their own instrument associated with them. And the only one they kept was Henrik and the cello. This is why Sondheim is great. It's because, he can come up with something very schematic and very rigid as like a set of rules. And then he just decides to just break them, to break free of that rigid concept. And there's another composer in the 20th century, Bela Bartok, who's sort of famous for this. We studied him a lot when I was in music school. What you always learn about Bartok is that, like, if you study any of his pieces, you see that at the beginning, he sets up a procedure. Like sort of a rule-based procedure about how he's going to write this piece. And then it's only like, 10 bars into it that he's like breaking it and just does what it's, and that is, that's something that I try to share as I coach and sort of teach young composers is I say, like, music has a mind of its own. It's like a plant. It's like a weed. It wants to grow up the side of a house, and it wants to just do its own thing. You can go in with all of your, bold plans and great ideas, but in the end, you are doing yourself and your music a disservice if you stick rigidly to these kind of, theories, music wants to just express itself. So that's what happened here. And, I mean, this is a score that it's very motive driven, as Sondheim got more and more into that. I mean, I think that, it was certainly, you talked about it in depth in terms of Merrily We Roll Along and Sweeney Todd.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that those are really where he started that seriously.
But I think there's two things, like specifically starting with this show and with his other Lapine collaborations. He actually talks about this too in the Putting It Together book, where he started to break away a little bit from that rigidity of like what quote unquote like a musical theater score had to sound like. He was free to go a little bit more, I guess, artsy, I guess is the only way I can like put it, where it's like I wanted to do something a little bit different than, this is a song from Follies or this is a song from Company, and like this is a musical theater song that you're listening to. Can we do something different with that form? As well as he really says that this is his theme and variations score, which is true. The more you like delve into this score, it's like, oh, like he makes all the themes very present in the very first song, and then he just expands on those themes throughout the rest of the show.
Well, I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, but like, yeah, it's definitely a theme and variation score. And to me, the opening sonority, I mean, there's a lot of classical influences here. Mm-hmm. To me, the opening sonority is very reminiscent of the opening sonority of Aaron Copland's ballet Appalachian Spring. It's what we would call sort of open intervals, so fourths and fifths. Rather than the stacked thirds of like sort of very traditional classical and romantic harmony. Copland really came to like stacking up fourths and fifths that are more, it's, what we call open sounds. And Sondheim was very into that in this score. I think that he called this score his Britain score. And
yes, I think
we'll touch on this a little bit later, perhaps, because I think that in the song that comes after the one we're going to talk about today, that's where I hear the Britain most clearly. I just think that this is like maybe his most sort of 20th century modernist score. A little bit of Copland, a little bit of Britain, probably some other influences, whereas like the older stuff is more influenced by Brahms and Ravel. I mean, Ravel's a 20th century composer, and he's always, he's never very far away from Sondheim's heart, as we know. The other thing I was going to say about, as a response to what you were mentioning before, is that like, it's funny how Sondheim, he always wants the freedom of like less eyes and less pressure, because, one thing that he talked about was like how when he was starting off on Broadway, this was just at the end of that golden age when a lot of pop songs were coming from Broadway scores, like Rodgers and Hammerstein. Those were all played on the radio. Gershwin was played on the radio. They became these kind of jazz standards that everybody knew. And that was like the major source of new popular music. When Sondheim came along, that was gone. And he has always said, or he always did say, that that was like tremendously freeing for him, that he didn't have to worry about writing towards the pop. You know, he didn't have to worry about making lyrical alterations so that it could be non-specific. He could just be as specific as he wanted to. And now he doesn't have to worry about even being on the Broadway of his time, which is not like the most popular thing. He gets to go off Broadway and then just do like this super artsy fartsy thing that he wants to do. I think
that's a huge point that you just brought up. Like, this is when Sondheim comes in, we are ending that golden age of Broadway. And after like this huge debacle that is Merrily We Roll Along, he's like, I don't even know if I want to be on Broadway anymore. And so he's brought into the off-Broadway world where, he doesn't even have to worry about filling a house. It's like, whatever, the 150 subscribers to this theater will come and fill it out. I don't actually have to worry about attracting other people, so I can be as wild as I want to be.
You know, the shame to me is that, he had many offers to write instrumental music, just like, concert music. And he always turned them down. He never did it. I mean, like every orchestra in the country would have loved for like a Sondheim symphony. And he always said no. It's like, man, if you want to get into a region where A, you can do what you really love, because you always said that you love writing music, you didn't really like doing lyrics, and B, where nobody's going to pay attention to what the hell is going on. Like, boy, come over to the world of the orchestra. The door's wide open.
So free. Yeah, so free. There is a couple of last things I just want to do before we get into the song here. Number one, there is this debate for Sunday in the Park with George. And I'm just going to announce it right now. Someone's decided to use a snowblower right outside my window here again. So if you're hearing that, I apologize, but I live in a snowy climate. It's the first act versus the second act. There are still people to this day that's like, you don't need the second act at all. Everything that needs to be said in this show is summed up in that first act. Do you come down on any side of that argument?
Oh, yeah. I come down on the side that if that's what you think, then you have missed the point entirely.
Sure.
Entirely. I mean, of course, people say the same thing about Into the Woods. And once again, they miss the entire point. But there is like a stopping point. Like, you can take the kids out of the theater after Act 1, and that's fine. But if you're an adult, like, stick around and, buckle your seatbelt, because this is what it's all about. And of course, Sondheim makes the connection so clear musically. I mean, that's one thing that I think that we will probably end up discussing a little bit when we talk about this song today, is just how there are parallels between the songs in the first half and the songs in the second half. And of course, the thematic resonances, just echo through the entire thing. So it's a gestalt. It's a whole, as a two-act show, and that's really all there is to it.
You did mention the synthesizers here as well. I did want to take some time and talk about them in regards to this song in particular. I think it should be said, like, the synthesizer just as a thing wasn't like brand new, but as far as like even pop music was only starting to experiment, I would say in the late 70s into the early 80s as this show is being developed. I'm actually not sure if this is the first Broadway show to experiment with synthesizers. My guess is probably not, but like...
Oh, definitely not, because there's synthesizers in Company.
Oh, that's true. Like
I mean, this stuff goes back at least a decade before this show. But it's all about the sounds that you pick and that you program into the thing. And I don't know, I'm just not into like the steel drums that are going on here and the kind of electric marimbas. And there's a lot of synthesized harpsichord in Sondheim before this. I mean, Company being number one with a bullet. Yeah, doesn't really float my boat.
Do you know what the synthesizers were in the original production?
Oh no, I don't know. I'm not a gearhead. I don't know about that stuff. I'm sure that you'll have guests on later on in the season who know about that stuff better than I do.
They're not Moog, I know that, but
I would love to hear a tunic orchestration of this show with a big full orchestra.
Sure.
I think it would sound very different. I mean, I will give Serabin a few, bits of credit. I think there are some things that work very well. I mean, the way he writes for the horn and really aggressively writes for the horn in a way that like just puts terror into the hearts of horn players everywhere when they're going to have to play this show. And they have to, nail that last high note. Bum, bum, but an octave higher. Yeah, I mean, that is like...
Two of them were in the pit for the original show, is what I was told.
Precarious. Very precarious. French horn is like maybe the most precarious instrument that anybody has to play. And to give it that really exposed, powerful, super high note in such critical moments, I mean, that is just like tempting fate.
Hey everyone, just Kyle breaking into the conversation here to tell you about some of the people that help this show continue to go. As I always say, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's of course greatly appreciated. Putting Together is an independent podcast, so if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. This does mean I should give a huge thank you to the God That's a Good tier from Patreon. That's Jack, Todd, Robert, Luis, Christopher, Stephen, and Derek. If you want to also help support me and join these fine people, you can go to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Let's get back to the show. All right, so what song are we talking about here today, Will?
Talking about The Day Off, Kyle.
Correct. A quick little backstory here. I'm opening up the book, putting it together here right now. This was conceived primarily first as the dog song. That's what it was called when it was first being rehearsed at Playwrights Horizons, and would eventually get kind of molded into what is called the Day Off sequence. So I'm going to read from this. So Lapine is quoted the same. The Day Off was conceived as a series of songs for our secondary characters. The dog song was intended to be a moment of humor for George, sketching the two dogs that are in the painting. He inhabits them as he sings in their quirky voices. Then Sondheim jumps in and says, "There's a machine called a vocoder that I think we discovered when we went together to see Laurie Anderson perform at BAM. It's a sausage-shaped microphone that transforms your voice into a chipmunk or an old lady or whatever sound you like. It's a magical thing. So I went with Paul Gemignani to one of the shops in the 40s near Broadway. We looked at them and we thought Mandy could conceal one in his sketch pad. But when we approached him with the idea, he scoffed. I don't need a vocoder. I'll give you whatever voice you want. He auditioned the three wonderful and separate dogs for us, and we chose the ones that we wanted." So that's how this song starts. Any strong feelings about vocoders?
Oh, Superman. Oh, John. Oh, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad.
Well, no, I mean, we're much more accustomed to the sound of a vocoder these days because, like, auto-tune, I mean, it's not a vocoder, but it sounds
Similar
an awful lot, or it can be made to sound an awful lot like one. Yeah, I mean, vocoders have become a little bit more mainstream. Why Sondheim still wants to hear it through a vocoder? I don't know. Maybe we should all listen to it.
Yeah, we should try that.
We should get a recording of it through the
Peter
vocoder.
Frampton on that or something.
But I mean, it does give Mandy Patinkin and later on, whoever else, a real tour de force to get to do.
Right, yeah, you are really performing the song. This is where I need to be really upfront with everyone. And I don't know if this is a hot take or anything. As much as I love this score, I really, really hate this first half of the song.
This is one of the songs that turned me off at the beginning. I've come to appreciate it, but it really turned me off.
Yeah, there's an appreciation I have like musically for it, but just as a listening exercise, even doing like the prep for this episode, each version I listened to, I was like, I just want this to be over. I don't really want to be listening to this part of the song. And then I like it in the second half as we bring all the other people in. Because that's the other thing we're doing here. It's not just the dogs that we start off with. This is essentially trying to introduce every single person and their relationship within this painting. So it's a very in-depth sequence. And the thing that Sondheim said too is like what he really was struggling with, because this actually used to be even longer than what it is in the show. But he didn't want it to feel like okay, checklist, and we're now going to this person, now we're going to this person, now we're going to this person, because it very much bores the audience.
Yeah, he said that it would really reduce their ability to be surprised, and he listed as an example the first time that he went to see a chorus line, and it's like you see the first person start to do their monologue, and you think, oh my god, 15 more of these. Yeah. But then he said, it ended up not being so bad because they combined them certain ones into duets and trios, and monologues they sort of synthesized. So yeah, I mean, Sondheim, ever the man of the theater, always thinking about how to keep an audience on its on the edge of its seats.
Well, what's interesting interesting too is like in many ways, again, the other Lapine show that comes right after this, Into the Woods, has a similar thing. Like the intro to Into the Woods is like, here's every single character you need to know, their relationships with each person, and basically the plot of the show. Like we're setting up everything in that 11-minute opening number of Into the Woods, and this is kind of doing a similar thing. It's like we need to know all the people, how they're related to each other, and why they're important to George specifically.
And I think that Sondheim could get away with it more in Into the Woods because A, it happens right at the beginning of the show. So it's like setting it up. And B, oh, nice cup, by the way.
Thank you.
For listeners at home, Kyle is drinking from an Into the Woods on Broadway
That's right.
cup there. And also because it's a sequence of fairy tales. And fairy tales are all about, just laying out who the characters are in simplistic form. Here, we're several numbers into the show already. I mean, we're good, I don't know, probably half an hour into the first act.
I was going to say, there's been a bunch of book scenes. It's been a while. We've been with the characters for a while before this song shows up.
And of course, with Sondheim at this point, I mean, the story of Sondheim, like as a composer for the theater, is a story basically of atomization, where it's like, when he starts out, like he's actually writing songs, they're like self-contained units that start and stop. And at this point now he's writing much more interspersed, continuous things. There's so many things in here that it's like, well, what really qualifies as a song? When does the song start? When does it stop? And of course, that reaches its apotheosis in passion.
I don't know if I've used this analogy before, but I'm essentially seeing it from someone else who was talking about the Pixar films, how they have become more and more about abstractions of ideas rather than like traditional animation. Because you start off with like that question, like, what if toys had feelings, right? It's like a cool concept, something that maybe we even thought of as kids. To you get to like Inside Out, where it's like, what if feelings had feelings? And like it's a total abstraction of something, of a big idea sort of thing. So I feel like Sondheim, you can do this other evolution of him. It's like very classic Broadway thing, all the way up to like, well, let's just stretch this as far as we can possibly go. And like, let's do it about a painting and make it up. And like the feeling of artists and the feeling of like children and art being combined into an idea. Like when you try to pitch the show, like if someone came to you with like just pitching the show, you'd be like, you are a crazy person. Like it really doesn't feel like, oh, of course this is a musical that we could put on stage.
And yet how lucky we are that it was.
Here's where we're going to start off. By the way, I'm not going to do dog voices. I am sorry to disappoint everyone, but we start off, right, he's out in the... Actually, I should ask you, do you remember what is happening right before this scene starts?
Yeah, I think that right before... Well, there was the gossip scene where everybody's sort of, talking smack about George. And then, if I'm not mistaken, he sees Dot sitting on a park bench. And this is our first introduction to Louis the Baker. He comes and he says, "Oh, Dot, I brought your favorite cream puffs," and then makes a quick run off stage.
Louis is introduced. We also see the red primer book, which becomes very important, specifically in the second act. So her Dot learning to read, and this is him basically, introducing the characters that will become members of the painting, and him doing little sketches out in the park on, as the title would suggest, his day off on a Sunday. He's out there and he is singing specifically about the dogs. If the head was smaller, if the tail were longer, if he faced the water, if the paws were hidden, if the neck was darker, if the back was curved, more like the parasol. And he goes bum 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 bum.
If the head was smaller, if the tail were longer, if he faced the water, if the paws were hidden, if the neck was darker, if the back was curved, more like the parasol. Bum, 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 bum.
I think it's all pretty clear at this point. Do you take away any larger themes?
No, I don't think that, like, oh my God, like, I can't believe you use parasol. Like, I don't think there's anything deeper meaning into that. I think what's so interesting about George as a character that you see in most of his songs that he does is that he doesn't speak incomplete thoughts. It's always sentence fragments, or it's normally sentence fragments, so that it's like he's not actually finishing his thought. Like, if the head was smaller, well, then what? He doesn't say. If the tail were longer, and then what? Like, he's just thinking, well, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do that. So he's really trying to conceive of, again, what is going to become this massive painting that he's working on, him trying to come up with that. So it's like him just trying things. As any creative does, you're throwing stuff at the wall and seeing like, oh, does this work? No? Yes? Okay, great. We can continue or like disengage.
So, Kyle, I have a question for you as an English major. I'm just noticing something for the first time, which is that some of these sentences use the subjunctive mood and some do not. So it's if the head was smaller, if the tail were longer, if the paws were hidden, if the neck was darker. What are we to read into this?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question.
Like, why would you change it up, you know?
Yeah, just say either all have them as were or all have them as was. I guess maybe just for variety, to trip up the actor, because sometimes like to do that.
Listeners, write in with your thoughts about the subjunctive mood, please.
Actually, I just noticed too, there's actually a misspelling in my copy of this book. It says the tail were longer. It's sort of if the tail were longer. That's a misprint. I do like that he always comes back to that, just like the parasol, because he brings that back in the song Sunday as well. But he continues on here by going, more shade, more tail, more grass. Would you like some more grass? And then he starts into Spot. This is the dog Spot. And then rough. Thanks. The week has been rough. When you're stuck for life on a garbage scow, only 40 feet long from stern to prow, and a crackpot in the bow, wow, rough.
More shade. More tail. More grass. Would you like some more grass? Rough. Thanks, the week has been rough. When you're stuck for life on a garbage scow, only 40 feet long from stern to prow, and the crackpot in the bow, wow, rough.
I think Spot, if Sondheim was concerned that Maria rhymed too much in the score of West Side Story, and that indicated that she was too effete to be a streetwise teenager in, freshly off the boat from Puerto Rico in New York. What can we say about Spot here? I mean, he is as erudite as they come, Yeah. I mean, but you got to give him credit. They're great rhymes. I mean, a garbage scow from stern to prow, crackpot in the bow. Wow. And then he, goes into making a dog sound. It's so much fun.
It is actually a pun too, because it's in the bow, wow, rough. Like rough as in like opposite of soft.
Right. So, rough as in rough, like a dog would be doing in rough seas. And bow, stern and bow, or port and bow, whatever it is. And then bow wow. Oh, it's great.
Yeah. So really good, like great little
so
word
clever.
for here. I actually find it interesting, too, how different actors embody the voice, which I think is great. I think it should be up to the actor to decide, like, how do I want to do this? I will say, like, Jake Gyllenhaal and Mandy Patinkin are fairly similar with how they vocalize it. So for whatever reason, and this is me being somewhat of a Mandy Patinkin defender for the rest of the show, I think Jake Gyllenhaal stands off with some of the rougher, like, high pitches that just hit my ear wrong. Oh, I should have looked it up. I apologize before I did this. But the actor who is doing it in the London cast decides to do this as a Scottish accent, which I think is actually interesting too. So he's really playing around with probably like class and like different regions within the UK too. So he continues on going, the planks are rough and the wind is rough and the master's drunk and mean and gruff, with the fish and scum and planks and ballast. The nose gets numb and the paws get calloused. And with splinters in your ass, you look forward to the grass on Sunday, the day off. And then he barks going off.
The planks are rough and the wind is rough and the master's drunk and mean and gruff. With the fish and scum and planks and ballast. The nose gets numb and the paws get calloused. And with splinters in your ass, you look forward to the grass on Sunday. The day off.
Oh, ballast and calloused. Come on, scum and it's so amazing. They're all great. This is like peak Sondheim.
Honestly, best song he's ever written. Do you want to say anything musically about what's happening here, or would you want to wait for later?
Musically going on here, I don't know if I have much of a commentary on that. I would say that
it's pretty minimal. Yeah,
it's pretty minimal. But one thing I could say, and this thought just occurred to me. I sort of hinted that there's maybe a connection with the work of Benjamin Britten in this show.
Yeah,
Britten's most famous opera is called Peter Grimes. And it's all about a boy who is stuck on a ship. He's like a ship captain's, assistant, with this really terrible, gruff, evil, probably molester of a ship captain who makes his life living hell. And the dog is a little bit like the boy in Peter Grimes here. That just occurs to me right now.
Oh, just like vocally you're saying, or like musically?
No, just like plot thematic.
Oh, plot
wise.
thematic. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Again, I know that Sondheim always said he did not write autobiographically, but something that is very similar that he has mentioned is that in order for him to write lyrics, he does have to become the character. And this is a visual representation of that, right? So you're seeing George literally be like, what if I was this dog? What would I look like? How would I paint this dog inside of this painting? He's literally becoming them. And this is something that's supposed to be, and it actually does become very obvious when you do watch it, because he sings like usually the first one or two lines along with the new characters being introduced. And it's like, this is him actually inhabiting these characters. He's actually thinking of them in relation to being placed inside this painting specifically. Anyways, I just think it's an interesting way to visualize that idea of an artist like inhabiting their characters while they're creating.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was also thinking of that point. Because Sondheim says, like, yeah, I am an actor, but I am an actor in the process of creation, of writing. I have to inhabit these characters. And yeah, you see that exactly here. The other thing that has made me think is that, like, Sondheim must have done this. He must have done the dog voices when he was coming up with this. And I
got a vocoder for himself and was like speaking
right,
into
exactly. It. Yeah. And like the thing that I've always thought about this as I've imagined more like, this connection of like Sondheim as the creator of this section is like, is there any other moment in all of Stephen Sondheim's work that is as silly as this?
Yeah. It's a good. Okay, so obviously he's written comic songs, and there's some.
But they're witty.
Yes, I agree.
They're witty. They're funny. They're like high-minded, whatever. I mean, it's all about.
But like even like I was gonna say like the closest I could get to is like maybe Agony inside of Into the Woods, but even that that's still witty enough. Like it's not them doing silly voices.
That's right, exactly. It's not about doing a silly characterization. I can't think of any other silliness at this level. I mean, I just don't think of him as an artist who revels in that kind of silly, buffoonery. And yet there he must have been in his studio in Turtle Bay in Manhattan doing these voices.
I'll go even further than that. This is there's no way for me to prove this, so I'll just lay that claim out there. I feel that were this not an off-Broadway show, like not going to Playwright Horizons where they get that chance to do the workshop and work with the actors, if this was going straight, like let's say this was still Hal Prince that he was working with. Actually, no, let's just say it was James Lapine and they're both going to premiere this in a Broadway house. I bet you this song does not get written this way at all.
Yeah, or maybe it gets cut.
Yeah, because you're going to see the investors come in and be like, I don't know if we can do this. At least that's what it feels like to me. So I think it's great for him to like just get out of that mindset of, him. It has to be this exact way for this to be a Broadway show. It's like, yeah, let's just try this out. Silly dog voices for like 3 minutes. Continues on. There's a still spot going, roaming around on Sunday, poking among the roots and rocks, nose to the ground on Sunday, studying all the shoes and socks. Everything's worth it Sunday, the day off. And then starts sniffing around and goes, bits of pastry, piece of chicken. Here's a handkerchief that somebody was sick in. There's a thistle, that's a shallot. That's a dripping from the loony with the palate.
Roaming around on Sunday, poking among the roots and rocks, nose to the ground on Sunday, studying all the shoes and socks. Everything's worth it Sunday, the day off. Bits of pastry, piece of chicken. Here's a handkerchief that somebody was sick in. That's a thistle. There's a shallot. Here's a dripping from the loony with the palate.
Not the hugest fan of like the voices in this whole section, but gosh, I do appreciate this rhyme run that he goes on.
Yeah, and also in terms of like things that are sort of sui generis about this song, I mean, yeah, one is just like the silliness factor, but then also it's like, I mean, there's no other song in Sondheim's output that's from the perspective of an animal on the ground. He gets to like do new things that he's never talked about before, like sniffing socks. I
say that is the missed opportunity. They should have given Milky White Move On, because they could have really leaned into the move.
Yeah.
Write it, everyone.
Good one.
I have to tell you too, I don't know why it took me so long. This This is so embarrassing to admit. From the loony with the palate. For too long, when I was listening to this the first time, I thought they meant like palate as in like your teeth palette. I was like, what does that mean? It's like, oh no, the palette, like the painting palette that he's carrying around with him. Of course, that's what they mean. But all right, so then we get the introduction of Fifi, and she's a little yappy dog here. She goes, yap, out for the day on Sunday, off of my lady's lap at last. Yapping away on Sunday helps you forget the week just past. And then yep, everything's worth it Sunday, the day off. Yep, stuck all week on a lady's lap. Nothing to do but yawn and nap. Can you blame me if I yap? And then Spot goes, nope. And I say, yes.
Out for the day on Sunday, off my lady's lap at last. Yapping away on Sunday helps you forget the week just past. Everything's worth it Sunday, the day off. Yep. Stuck all week on a lady's lap. Nothing to do but yawn and nap. Can you blame me if I yap?
Nope.
There's just so much attention to
Well,
dog.
I guess, aside from just, again, great little wordplay and stuff, maybe not quite as in-depth as old Spot there. But in the book, I'm sure you're reading this from Look, I Finished the Hat.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of cut lyrics that got cut out of Fifi's stuff.
Don't show up, yeah.
So some of which are very clever. But again, it's like you can understand why those ended up on the cover.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just read those out.
This is not a musical about Spot and Fifi.
I know, right? Like, this gets to a certain degree. It's like, are we really spending this much time with the dogs?
Yeah.
So, Fifi's part that was cut. As I'm powdered and petted, I keep thinking of mud. As I'm ribboned and bowed and beretted, all I want is her blood. So whenever we're out where it's leafy, I play a game. I run off as far as and then the mistress yells, Fifi. So she's wanting to eat her owner is basically the part that gets cut.
Fifi is a very frou-frou kept dog, all of like very manicured, very, just like puffed out. But Fifi in the end is a dog. All she cares about is like playing in the mud and stuff. And she doesn't get to do it until Sunday. So it's a nice little characterization for these two dogs.
Yeah, I think it also shows class here too. I think something that is supposed to be, I guess, visually represented here is that this is both high and low class kind of coming together inside of a park. So we get to Spot here, the dock worker dog. I don't know how else to, more blue collar type of thing. And then we have Fifi, kind of like the high society dog who gets taken care of her every whim and carried around all over the place. So they continue on here saying, being alone on Sunday, rolling around in mud and dirt. And then Spot says, begging a bone on Sunday, settling for a spoiled dessert. Everything's worth it. And then Spot goes, Sunday, the day off. Something fizzy, something furry, something pink that someone tore off in a hurry. What's the muddle in the middle? That's the puddle where the poodle did the piddle.
Being alone on Sunday, rolling around in mud and dirt.
Begging a bone on Sunday, settling for a spoiled dessert.
Everything's worth it
Sunday,
the day off.
something fuzzy,
Something furry.
something pink that someone tore off in a hurry.
What's the muddle in the middle?
That's the puddle where the poodle did the piddle.
Oh, again, classic Sondheim. I mean, muddle, middle, puddle, poodle, piddle. I mean, he just couldn't help himself. And of course, he was the owner of two large standard poodles.
Oh, that's right. That's true. Yeah.
He was a big poodle guy. So, I guess there's a little bit more we can understand how he got inside these characters.
Oh, so this is like, that introduction piece here. We of course continue on here, meeting some more of the ensemble. So George now takes over in his normal voice, saying, taking the day on Sunday, now that the jury week is dead. Getting away on Sunday brightens the jury week ahead. Everyone's on display on Sunday, the day off. Bonnet flapping, bustle sliding, like a rocking horse that nobody's been riding. There's a daisy and some clover, and that interesting fellow looking over. And then the nurse, there's a few different people here, but basically they're the old lady who is eventually revealed to be his own mother, and the nurse are there. And so the old lady yells, nurse, And then the Georgia nurse overlap by saying, one day is much like any other, listening to her snap and drone. And the nurse continues on, still, Sunday with somebody's dotty mother is better than Sunday with your own. Mothers may drone, mothers may whine, tending to his, though, is perfectly fine. It pays for the nurse that is tending to mine on Sunday, my day off.
Taking the day on Sunday, now that the dreary week is dead. Getting away on Sunday brightens the dreary week ahead. Everyone's on display on Sunday.
The day off.
Bonnet flapping, bustle sliding, like a rocking horse that nobody's been riding. There's a daisy and some clover, and an interesting fellow looking over.
Nurse!
One day is much like any other, listening to her snap and drone.
Still, Sunday with someone's dotty mother is better than Sunday with your own. Mothers may drone, mothers may whine, tending to his, though, is perfectly fine. It pays for the nurse that is tending to mine on Sunday, my day off.
Well, one thing I would say is that, like, Sondheim, who is worried about, setting this up as just a sequence of numbers about the individual characters in the painting, I think that he does a very masterful job of eliding between the two little mini scenelets in these songs. Like, to me, it's like your attention is just diverted through this little transition section, and then you're into the next thing. And like, I mean, watching it, I don't feel like you think like, oh God, now what am I in for? I'm going to have to listen to 16 other little character vignettes.
Yeah, I agree.
It just seems very natural to me. And I'm sure that was done with, tremendous effort.
Oh, sure.
But I think he did it extremely well.
I think it's really just how it's presented, right? I will throw a little bit of praise here towards Lapine's direction when you do watch that, because it is very seamless as he goes between these different scenes as they're walking in, and just the choreography of this, it's very natural to the point when, again, when I rewatched it here just the other day, it's like you're halfway through and like, oh yeah, like this is an entire sequence. Like it's like it just feels so natural for it to lead one into the other.
The other thing that I would say about this is, the nurse gets her own little waltz tune right here, right?
Yeah,
mothers may drone, mothers may whine. I don't think it's something that we ever hear again, as far as I remember in this score. I don't think that it's something.
I have to do a deep dive.
Yeah, it's like 35 seconds maybe of music, and it's its own proper little tune. You can hum it. It's got its own little feel to it. It doesn't feel out of place, even though it is kind of, this sporadic moment. And then it's just gone. And again, this is what I'm talking about, the kind of atomization of Sondheim's technique. And also that, like I always think the same thing about, I guess this is Goodbye Old Pal from Into the Woods. I mean, that's just like barely a minute of music that is just so rich and beautiful, and it's it's all based on the themes, but it just goes away, it just comes and goes. And it's like at this point Sondheim is so at the height of his powers that he can just he can afford to waste a melody if he wants to. I mean, he hardly ever does.
Yeah. I bet you anything that it is some sort of like slow down version
I wouldn't
of
be surprised.
Theme that we've already heard, sort of thing. But so bonnet flapping, bustle sliding, like a rocking horse that nobody's been riding. That's supposed to be breasts, I'm assuming, or are you looking at that in a different way?
Yeah, no, that's what I've always thought.
So George is a bit of a horn dog, as we have discovered. The interesting fellow is that the guy that's like leaning back? Again, I'm forgetting how everything is placed in this show, or is it just an offhand comment?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly whom he's talking about. He might be talking about the ship. I mean, he's not a captain, but the dock worker type guy.
The other thing, of course, I do not think at all that this is a mistake, but someone's dotty.
Or maybe he's talking about Franz. Sorry, sorry to interrupt.
I think you're right.
I think he's talking. Yeah,
I think he's pointing to Franz, but completely cannot be a mistake. Someone's dotty mother. Using that word specifically again, Dot becomes a mother later on, and like plays his own mother later on named Marie. But anyways, saying dotty mother as he is someone who is using dots cannot be just blown past here either. Talking about Franz, this is when we get to know them. So we have Frida and Franz, the two
servants of Jim Dial.
That's what I wanted to say too. The other artist that we meet, Jules, Is that a real person or is that a made up person?
Probably a made up person. But again, I can only call him Jim Dial because that's his character on Murphy Brown.
Yes. He's a very distinctive voice. Like, it's like so impossible not to know who that is. George and Frida go second bottle because Franz has now started the second bottle of wine, drinking out on the grass. Ah, she looks for me. And Frida goes, he is bursting to go. Franz, near the fountain. I could let him. How to manage it? No. And then Franz goes, oh, so she says, you know, Franz, I believe that artist is drawing us. Who? Monsieur's friend. And then Franz goes, Monsieur would never think to draw us. We are only people he looks down upon. I should have been an artist. I was never intended for work. Artists work, Franz. I believe they work very hard. And then Franz goes like, work. We work. We serve their food. We carve their meat. We tend to their house. We polish their silverware. And then Frida goes, the food we serve, we also eat. But Franz says, for them we rush, wash and brush, wipe and wax. And then Franz relax.
I believe that artist is drawing us. Monsieur's friend.
Monsieur would never think to draw us. We are only people he looks down upon. Second bottle. As she looks for me.
He is bursting to go.
Near the fountain.
I could let him.
How to manage it?
No.
I should have been an artist. I was never intended for work.
Oh, artists work, Franz. I believe they work very hard.
Work? We work. We serve their food. We carve their meat. We tend to their house. We polish their silverware.
The food we serve, we also eat.
For them we rush, wash and brush, wipe and wax.
Franz, relax.
While he creates.
Well, I would say that once again, I think we get a little bit of a songlet here that, as far as I can tell, does not appear elsewhere. You know, again, a little bit more like silly voice work because, like, for example,
German
you know, for
extensive.
them, wie rasch, wasch und brush, wipe und wax. Yeah, I wonder why they decided to make these German. It seems kind of random to me. I've always been curious about that. Very funny little, you know, bits of dialogue here about whether or not artists work, but, you know, sort of, I mean, pithy but profound in the way of Sondheim Lapine.
By the way, talking about like TV connections here, in the original Broadway cast, this is data from Next Generation. This is Brent Spiner who's singing.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so that's who is in this. Just to reiterate, you know, high class, low cast. We're talking about someone. We've seen the nurse now tending to the older woman. These are the two servants tending to like the more fancy artist person. But Franz kind of continues on saying, while he creates, we scrape their plates, dust their knickknacks, hundreds to the shelf. Work is what you do for others, Liebchen. Art is what you do for yourself.
While he creates, we scrape their plates and dust their knickknacks, hundreds to the shelf. Work is what you do for others, Liebchen. Art is what you do for yourself.
This is obviously like this character's interpretation of art, which is not what I don't think the show's interpretation of art is ultimately when we get to the second act. But I do want to talk about it for a bit. Is like, how close do you agree with that? Which is art something you do for yourself?
Well, art is something that you do for yourself, and it's something that you do for others, and it's something that you do for work. I mean, it's so many different things. And if you want
It's
to
not
make
a binary, is what you're saying.
yeah, I mean, and you know, of course, the second act is all about like, how do you put it together? How do you make a life, a living in art and a life in art, and make them mesh somehow into you know, one individual's experience of the world? And this is sort of, you know, this is a thesis. This is setting up one idea in such a short little, as I said, pithy moment that you could just skirt by. And yet it's like one of the important ideas that is so pertinent to the big themes of this show.
Yeah, I think that this is very much a setting up and then knocking down when we get to putting it together, the song specifically, because this is there's a comment that happens in that one that I think is a direct reference to this. And I was really reminded of this, and now I can't remember who it was, but there was a stand-up comedian talking about how so often while they're traveling, they have people come up to them as like, oh, you know, I have so many jokes I've written down, or it's like, oh, I think I could do stand-up comedy, but you know, all of this is notebooks. He's like, well, you're not actually a comedian until you actually stand up in front of people and tell the jokes. Like, you can write as much as you want, but you actually have to get out there and do it. But in putting it together, like, George does say that, where he's like, I can't remember what the exact lyric is now off the top of my head, but it's like, if the idea is just an idea, it's as good as dead, I think is what it goes. right? It's like you have to actually act on it. You actually have to make it and put it out into the world, birth it into the world for it to actually be something. To me, Franz, I mean, we don't get to see a whole lot of his interiority, I realize, but he does come across as that character who's like, well, I could be an artist. Artist's work is basically easy. Just do this thing over here. But he's never actually tried. He's very good at judging the artist, but he's actually never tried it himself.
Yeah. I guess the one thing I would say is, you were talking towards the beginning of our conversation about the parallels between Act 1 and Act 2. And as I was doing a little bit of research and reading for this episode, I was looking back at Sondheim on Music, Minor Details, Major Decisions by Mark Eden Horowitz, which is based on the series of conversations that they had while looking at the collection of Sondheim manuscripts that's in the Library of Congress. Horowitz proposes a bunch of the parallels here. And he says, Sunday in the Park with George in the first act is closely related to It's Hot Up Here in the second. Sondheim says, absolutely. They also both deal with the same subject, which is posing. Color and Light and Cromulum number 7. Sondheim says, absolutely. And then he says, Finishing the Hat and Putting It Together. Sondheim says, yes, these are the same tune. And then this, you'll probably talk about this when you do this episode, but, apparently Mandy Patinkin at the wrap party for the Broadway production, Sondheim mentioned this to him, and Patinkin had no idea that they were the same tune. And Sondheim said, wait, you mean you've been singing this for a year and a half and you didn't know that they were the same? And Patinkin was like, he said that Mandy Patinkin looked at me as if I had taken his Christmas away. And so then Horowitz says, and it looked to me like The Day Off and Children in Art share similarities. And Sondheim says, no, really? Well, yes, there's a little thing, but there may be parallels. But then he goes on to say, I know you're talking about the actual tune of The Day Off, and there is a relationship there, but I think of the whole Day Off section with all the little vignettes in it, and the art gallery section with all the little vignettes in it are more related to each other. So he sees those as parallel constructions, that it's all of these tiny little, ditties that come in and out in the course of the scene. He says, then Finishing the Hat comes at the end of the Day Off section, and Putting It Together operates through the entire art gallery section. So the parallel is not absolutely rigid. But then I've learned not to make rigid parallels, but to suggest them. I think it would have been a mistake to just have Putting It Together at the end, the way Finishing the Hat is.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, great. See, we're simpatico. We're on the same page here. Last question I guess I have, which is, why Knickknacks? Why does he say it that way?
Oh, because it's German.
Oh, is that how Germans say it?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's never a silent K in German.
Got you. Okay. I've always just wondered why they, well, in my way, mispronounce it, and every performance always mispronounces it. Like, I always ask, like, for you, would you put this, like, top 3, middle 3, bottom 3? If we're looking at the entire score of Sunday, how would you rate this?
It's probably still in my bottom 3 from this particular score. It's not to say that it's bad, but it's just, I mean, like, it does not ascend to the heights of Color and Light, Children and Art,
For a score that I think has, like, 4, possibly you could make the argument 5, like, 5 out of 5 songs for me, rating 5 out of 5. This one is going at the bottom of my list. I can't do it with the dogs. It's just, I'm sorry, everyone. I just can't do it with the dogs. But write in if you love the dog section. I'm sure there are defenders out there who it's like their favorite piece. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining me here, of course. Before we end off here, I wanted to ask this question. This is the question I'm asking every single person this season. But like, this show is, of course, based on a painting, which is like a bizarre thing, of course, to like springboard an entire musical off of. For you, though, is there something odd that you can think of or would want to be turned into a musical?
Well, I wanted to, I was previewed this question, so I thought a little bit about it. And one thing I wanted to say before I give like my answer is that if any of the listeners are curious to see another musicalized representation of the world of an artist or of a painting, there is an opera by the 20th century avant-garde composer Georges Ligeti, who is a Hungarian composer, called Le Grand Macabre, the Grand Macabre, that takes place in a world that he calls Bruegel-land, which is based on the works of Peter Bruegel the Elder, who in the sort of Renaissance era, I guess, painted these truly terrifying works where, of like total hellscape and deprivation and, derangement and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And, it's not like Sunday in the Park with George in terms of like the plot being built around the painting, but it does take place in the world of this artist. And the opera itself is like totally deranged and crazy. It's very fun. As far as like contemporary avant-garde operas go, he really has fun with the show.
Can you spell the composer's last name?
Yeah, Ligeti, Ligeti. Okay. And the opera is called Le Grand Macabre.
Coding 00, highest security grade.
Another piece of work that, like Sweeney Todd, extensively quotes and develops the Dies Irae theme, because everything is about death coming to wipe out life on Earth. Anyway, so that was one little thing I wanted to say. But then, actually, as we were talking, we were talking about like an underexplored perhaps element of Sondheim's oeuvre is that he does not inhabit the world of animals very often. I thought, I wonder if there would be a good animal thing. So there are a bunch of novels that are from the perspective of animals. Apparently, one of the favorites is called The Art of Racing in the Rain, a heartbreakingly good novel narrated by Enzo the dog, who has observed closely the twists and trials in his race car driving human's life. So that might be interesting.
All right.
There's another Hungarian piece of art. I think it was a Hungarian movie called White God, and that was all about a stray dog on the streets of Budapest who kind of meets up with a bunch of big pack of other dogs. And he's trying to find his owner, but in the end, they like commit all of these kind of atrocities.
Oh, okay.
So maybe that could be a good musical.
It's one of Sondheim's favorite movies, which is I'm going to totally butcher the French here, but O Hussard Balthazar, which is about
Balthazar, which is about
the donkey, right? Which got kind of remade as EO here just past year. It's about it. Yeah. So if you want to watch a movie about a donkey who gets to interact with different humans through its short and brutal life, there's outlets for that too. So
I can't wait to hear what the rest of your guests are going to say about this. I mean, I think that my answer was kind of like not all that interesting. I'm sure that there are some very creative people with very interesting answers.
I will save my answer to the very end. But But thank you so much, Will, once again. If people wanted to check you out, see what you're up to online, is there an easy way to do so?
Well, I usually plug my Twitter, which is at Will C. White, and my website, which is willcwhite.com. In this rare instance, I'm going to also plug my Instagram, which is also the same, at Will C. White. And the only reason, I hardly ever post on there, but the only reason that I will plug it is because I was in France, I was in Paris last summer, and I actually went to the Ile de la Grande Jatte. And I took some photos from there. It's
been kind of overrun with like buildings and stuff now, right?
Well, I mean, it's like you can live there. I mean, it's like it's a whole neighborhood, the island. But to go to the park, to the area where Seurat was painting, you can do it. But all of the views that you see, like in the painting, have been totally obscured. They've kind of laid out that park in a different way. So in order to try and get the same perspective, I think I had to flip my reverse mirror my photo that I took. And so anyway, you can go see what it looks like now.
All right. That's perfect. Great. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. This is an independent production, and you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Putting Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about Everybody Loves Louie. I don't know if you've heard, but Louie's cakes are an art. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.